The following teaching is possible thanks to the friends and partners of Spirit and Truth Fellowship International.
Welcome back to our seminar on God's foreknowledge and how God relates to mankind. Anybody who reads the Bible knows that God predicts the future. The question isn't, can God predict the future? Sure he can, and he does. In fact, that's one of the ways we know that he's God and not something else is God, because he so accurately predicts the future. But the question is, how does he predict the future? That's the question. Now, the Bible clearly says that he does. This is my Holman Christian Standard Bible, Isaiah chapter 46, verse 10. And here's what God says. I declare the end from the beginning, and from long ago what is not yet done, saying, my plan will take place, and I will do all my will. And people read that and say, God has to know the future. I mean, God has to know all of the future. He says that he declares the end from the beginning. You know, and I want to go back and reassert, it's important for us, if we're going to read and understand the Bible, to read and understand it accurately. The question is not, can God predict the future? The question is, how does God predict the future? And I'm going to assert that this verse in Isaiah 45:10, actually shows us the power model, not the knowledge model. Now, what do I mean by two models? Okay, let's get that on the table, because this is something, even though we may not talk about it, it may not be language we use every day, it's something we're very familiar with. When something happens and we're not sure exactly how it happens, different people step forward with different explanations. And those different explanations are different models. So, for example, here I am standing in front of the camera. I obviously exist. How did that happen? Well, a person who believes in evolution uses what we call an evolutionary model. He's got the model of evolution and says, here you are, and my model, evolution, explains why you're here. Then someone, usually a Christian, sometimes someone out of the intelligent design movement, steps forward and says, no, we agree that you're here, but the model evolution, that's not going to work. We believe that you were designed, that you were created, if you will. And so you have two models. This is the evolution model and the creation model. And then we look for explanatory power. Now remember, when we're talking about things in the past that we can't recreate, how do we know what model's best? Well, obviously, there's no 100% way of knowing, or there wouldn't be any argument between the evolutionists and the creationists. They would know. But when something has happened in the past, what we're looking for is explanatory power. And actually, we use this every day. In courtrooms across the nation, every day, you know, there's something that's been committed. Let's say a car is missing. And so the prosecuting attorney comes up with a model and he says, okay, here's my model. That guy stole it. And the defense attorney comes up and says, no, I get what your model is, but your model doesn't work. It doesn't explain the facts. What explains the facts better is the lady was trying to scam the insurance company, and so she drove it into a lake, and so he has a different model. Again, the facts are not disputed. The car's gone. What people are asking is, which model explains the facts the best? Now, in our case, see, we have what the Bible says. And to some degree, how I feel about God, and the fact that, well, even the Bible says I'm supposed to have a relationship with him. So what I'm looking for is a model that has explanatory power. The knowledge model says that God can predict the future because he knows it. The power model says God can predict the future because he can do it. And if we look in the Bible, let's just look at the one verse that I read already. And just let's analyze what it actually said. Because again, if you and I are going to have a relationship with God, and that's what this is all about. I I mean, bottom line, this is all about me and you being able to understand God, and from that understanding, really be able to relate to Him, to love Him, to give our all to Him with like, yes, He really deserves this. He needs this, and it makes a difference. See, that's where we're coming from with this. And so when I just read the Bible, does the Bible, just what I just read in Isaiah 46:10, I'm sorry, in 46:10, does it support a power model or a knowledge model? Let's just read it again. He says, I declare the end from the beginning. Well, he says what's going to happen. He's predicting. Doesn't tell us how he does that yet. And from long ago, what is not yet done, saying, my plan will take place, and I will do all my will. So if we actually read the verse supports the power model. He says, I declare what's going to happen, and then when it's time for it to happen, I do it. That's the power model. That's exactly right. He doesn't say in the Bible, I declared what was going to happen because I knew it. Now, when it comes to His plan, God makes plans. God makes predictions. God makes promises. And when it's time for them to be fulfilled, He acts and He does things. Well, let's talk about this for a second then. If we're looking for explanatory power and what explains things the best, then where did our concept of the immutable God come from? Where did the concept that God is immutable, that God can't change, where did that come from? And by the way, isn't God omniscient and omnipotent? Omnipotent, and omniscient. And I'd heard those words all my life. Even before I became a Christian, I'd heard, that God was omniscient, God was omnipotent. I guess I always thought those words were in the Bible. I mean, many Christians were using them. But honestly, if you go look up the word omniscient, it isn't in the Bible. Neither is the word omnipotent. Those are theological terms that have been assigned based on assumptions. And the assumption is that God perfectly knows the future. But that is an assumption. It's not what the Bible actually says. Well, where did our view come from then that God had to be omniscient and omnipotent? Where did that come from if those words in fact aren't in the Bible? And the actual theological source for a lot of this was way back with Plato and his theories of forms. And I'm not going to get into all that philosophy stuff, but basically here's the bottom line of it. By the time you brought this to out of Platonism and into where Augustine was, writing in the 400s, they knew God was perfect. And instead of using a Hebraic model of perfect, like Job chapter 1 says, Job was perfect. Well, he certainly wasn't perfect in the way that God is perfect. But if you take a Greek mathematical model, and that's what I'm going to assert, that the assumptions that have been made about God and what we call His absolute foreknowledge came out of a Greek mathematical model. And so here's God, and they say, okay, God is perfect, like a mathematical formula. God is perfect. Okay, and then they say, okay, well, if God's perfect, then He can't change. Because if He's perfect now and He changes, it's got to be for the worse. Because if He could change for the better, He wasn't perfect now. So He's either perfect now and He can't change, or He's not perfect now and He can change and get better. And so then they say, well, God's got to be perfect. Well, if God's perfect then, and He can't change, and nothing can be added to Him, then His knowledge must be perfect. He must know every single thing to infinity past and to infinity future. Because if you could add one iota to His knowledge, He wouldn't have been perfect before. So that's where the concept of an immutable God came from. It came from a Greek mathematical model of what perfection is. I want to assert that the Bible doesn't use a Greek mathematical model of perfection. I want to assert that the Bible uses a relational model of perfection, just like it did in the book of Job. And I want to assert that the Bible never actually says that God can't learn anything. In fact, we're going to read verses where God does learn things. Oh, well, how could that be? How could God learn anything? And the answer is that when God made the decision to create free will beings, they were genuinely free will beings. They could make a thought that was brand new in time and that had never existed before. And God is in time. We'll see this in a future session, but God is in time with us. And as time moves on and new realities are created, God learns those just like we do. He's constantly looking forward. He's constantly predicting the future. And because he's so powerful, he can speak the universe into being. When he makes a prediction, he can bring it to pass. We're going to continue to learn this material and how this really helps us love God and relate to him. God bless you.